Vice President Harris on the campaign trail unveiling a plan to add what she claims is tax relief for small businesses. It's another pillar of her economic policy platform. Yesterday, she unveiled a proposal to increase existing small business tax deductions for startups by about 10 times. Her goal is 25 million new small business applications by the end of her first term, so within 4 years. She doesn't talk about how exactly she's going to pay for all of this, though, or what the real cost is and what it actually does. John Kartch is joining me now. He is the vice president at Americans for Tax Reform, ATR.org. John, it's great to have you on.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
I mean, it's aspirational to increase the number of small businesses that are starting up in America. I get that, but this plan is filled with flaws. Not before you even get to the actual cost, what it's going to mean to our deficit, it's filled with flaws. So let's talk about this for a second, what it really means.
So you have a long list of tax increases she wants to impose, plus the regulatory burden. And she says she wants to help small businesses. Well, guess it's small business startups especially. Well, guess what? One of the most difficult things to deal with as a small business startup is a lot of government red tape. And if you look at her list of regulations and tax increases, the only people who are going to be able to comply with it are large existing businesses. These small businesses aren't going to be able to start up in the first place. Today, she said, I'm only going to increase the federal capital gains tax rate to 33%. Well, you know what China's at? China is at 20%. Communist China is at 20%. Kamala wants to bring the federal capital gains tax to 33%. You then have to add your state burden. In Ohio, it's 3.5. Michigan, it's 4.05. You're looking at mid to upper 30s for a capital gains tax. And bear in mind, the gain that you pay on, much of that over time is simply inflation. So you're paying a tax on inflation created by the government, especially politicians like Kamala Harris, and then now they make money off it. And I just like to you just picture this. You work to build up your small business for 30, 40 years, and then you go to sell it. You can easily end up paying a top capital gains rate under Kamala into 30, approaching 40%, depending on the state you live in.
Which is two times what you're paying in China. I mean, that's unbelievable. Yeah, China is the communist country in this deal, right? Not America. Is that? Do I have that correct? Am I remembering that from high school properly, or am I confused?
Yeah, I mean, look, we shouldn't be raising the capital gains tax at all. You know, if anything, we should be cutting it. Europe's average, by the way, is 18%. Those are our competitors. So she wants you to think, and the media dutifully reports, hey, Kamala's got this plan for small business startups. Hey, that sounds great. But then when you look at it, it will discourage small business formation.
Right. It is, by the way, the capital gains tax at 33%, the highest since Jimmy Carter, the highest since 1978. We remember how booming the economy was under Jimmy Carter.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We want to go toward Jimmy Carter. That's the plan.
So this also would affect about 26 million small business owners who would see tax rates over 43.4%. And this on top of the other tax plan that the Harris-Walz campaign is calling for, essentially the largest tax hike in history. Higher income taxes, higher business taxes, higher investment taxes, the unrealized capital gains tax, an expanded death tax, and that's just the beginning of it.
I don't know how she looks out on the economy and says, you know what this economy needs right now is a $5 trillion tax increase, but that's what she's decided. And she's moving us more toward a European big government approach. You understand there's very little innovation and business formation in Europe because the government is so worried about someone somewhere getting rich that no businesses get off the ground, and that's the direction she wants to move us toward. On the corporate rate, so what's interesting about the corporate rate is that it's not actually paid by the corporation, right? The corporation cuts the check to the government, but for them it's just overhead,
right?
No different than if the cost of raw materials goes up.
It gets passed along to you and me as consumers. The businesses aren't absorbing these higher tax rates. They've still got a fiduciary responsibility to their share owners, to the business owners, to make a profit. So they're going to pass that expense along to us. which drives up inflation even more than it already is.
That's right. Every time you buy something, and when you work, if half of Americans work for a company organized as a corporation, it either it's like you can't create or destroy matter, right? It just gets pushed somewhere. So it either comes out of your paycheck, you get paid less, or the customers pay more. So China, we were talking about China. Kamala wants to raise the corporate rate from the current Trump rate of 21%. She wants to raise that to 28. Okay, China is at 25. The Asia average is 20. And why move in that direction when you look at the economy right now? That's going to kill jobs. It's going to discourage entrepreneurial risk-taking in this country. And then you have the death tax, right? She not only wants to increase the death tax, she wants to impose a second death tax. And the way that works is, so right now, like let's say parents die, and you may be subject to the death tax depending on how much stuff there is. But what she wants is to add a second one where everything that parents have, objects, stocks, land, etc., she's going to take away what's called stepped up basis. So that means you have to figure out what the value of it was when it was acquired, say by your great grandparents, 80 years ago. And then she forces a capital gains realization when you receive these assets from parents, okay? And then you pay the government. That is going to be an enormous both cost burden and also a privacy invasion and just the paperwork. How do you figure out what something cost
right.
a long time? Land might be easy, but then again, it's so expensive. You think of how valuable land is now, and in rural areas, land is incredibly expensive.
And is it taking into account what it was paid, what they paid for it 100 years ago in today's dollars or in 1924 dollars?
Well, yeah, they take the exact. Well, right. Plus, there's inflation built into that. Exactly, and it's not adjusted for inflation, so you end up getting whacked on that. So I don't. You talk about small business formation, and if you begin thinking, okay, I've got to pay this much in tax, and if I'm really successful and I want to sell this when I retire, then I'm going to get whacked, and the government's going to take 30 to 40%. I'm not sure that's going to encourage. It's not going to encourage innovation in this country.
It's disincentivizing innovation in this country is what it's doing. We're talking to John Kartch. He's vice president at Americans for Tax Reform, ATR.org. The other aspect of this is that, remember, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris both voted against. I'm not even sure Tim Walz showed up for the vote for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which are about to expire, and that directly benefited about 30 million small businesses in America under Donald Trump. That's set to expire. Pass-through businesses that benefited from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act account for, I believe, half of, or more than half, nearly two-thirds of private businesses, all the small partnerships and S-corps in America. That's where a lot of these independent owners, small business owners, are generating their own revenue.
That's right. And Scott, we have this awesome list at our site, atr.org/Ohio. It's a list of specific businesses in Ohio that benefited from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and they explain and document exactly what they did. It's hiring people, it's expanding their facilities, it's purchasing equipment, it's raising pay, enhancing benefits. It's an excellent list, and I encourage everyone to go check that out, atr.org/Ohio. And so Kamala has said repeatedly she wants to, quote, repeal the Trump tax cuts. She says she wants to repeal those. She has never retracted those statements, okay? And if they get in there, House, Senate, and Kamala, those are going to go away. And that's on top of the other stuff she's proposing.
We need to first. Well, that needs to be one of the first priorities of an incoming second Trump administration. And especially if Republicans retake the House and Senate, is to make the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act benefits permanent. Before we're out of time, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
It will be the biggest tax fight in modern history. We're all going to be talking about this in about a year and a half. It will be the biggest tax fight in at least 30 years.
John Kartch here on the Scott Sand Show. The other aspect of Kamala's proposal, what little details that she's been willing to share, is that it would cost about $1.7 trillion. That's what it would add to the deficit. That's a conservative estimate, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a complete misnomer. There's no such thing as a responsible federal budget. but $1.7 trillion added to the deficit over the next decade. So, yeah, she's obviously got to raise taxes because she's not going to cut spending to make up for that $1.7 trillion. So she's got to generate revenue from all of the tax hikes that she has proposed. You didn't even mention, in the midst of all of the tax increases, you didn't even mention raising the corporate tax rate to 28%, up from 21%, which makes American tax rate for corporations one of the highest in the world.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's she's in the wrong direction and all this stuff. And when you talk about the spending burden, she's worked in the government her whole career, just like Biden did. They've never worked in the private sector. They don't know what it's like to have to look at budgets and prioritize. I doubt it's ever even occurred to her to look out over the vast federal budget and say, hey, you know what we shoshould cut, or should we take a look at this, or do we really need that, or what if we can? That would never even occur to her. It's always just increasing the size and power of the federal government. And the IRS piece, let's not forget about that. She cast the deciding vote to supersize the IRS. They're going to be auditing all sorts of people, such as small business startups, which an audit can easily last 2 to 3 years, even when there's no change in your tax liability. The last thing you have to deal with is the stress, the time, and the money of fighting an aggressive IRS agent.
Ironically, Sherrod Brown also voted to increase the number of IRS agents by 87,000, and he apparently has been late paying all of his tax returns. So that may come back to bite him, but I don't know. It's all of this is just such a mess. I will say this, to be fair, I don't think Republicans look at the federal budget to find where they could cut either. I think everybody just loves to spend. That's part of our country's problem right now.
Yeah, right. There's not a sustained focus effort to do it. That needs to happen. There will be a reckoning at some point. We can't keep punting and punting and punting. Eventually, there's going to be a major problem with the debt.
Kamalanomics.org. John, are you the guy behind that website? I love that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it just occurred to me one day, hey, we should just put everything in one spot so it's easy to find for people. And it's you can also read the same stuff at hr.org, but if you go to kamalanomics.org, it's just all her stuff only. If you want just one-stop shopping Kamala, there you go.
I hope Donald Trump is using that as part of his debate prep. John Kartch, you can find him on X on Twitter, John Kartch, Kartch, Vice President, Americans for Tax Reform. John, great to have you on. I appreciate your insight.
Hey, appreciate it, Scott. Have a great day.